It was an autumn afternoon in Dark Vale, and Lucas was playing near the neighborhood's abandoned park. The park, with its rusty swings and toys covered in fallen leaves, emanated an aura of nostalgia mixed with abandonment. Helena, his mother, called him for dinner from across the street, but her voice was lost in the cold wind. As night's shadows drew closer, Lucas vanished, leaving behind an interrupted tranquility. By nightfall, Helena realized he hadn't returned. She felt an inexplicable chill and, driven by maternal instinct, set out across the town, calling his name. News of the disappearance spread quickly in Dark Vale, a small, isolated town where everyone knew each other. Soon, Helena's neighbors united in a collective search as panic grew. The town square became a meeting point for volunteers, and the emotion was palpable. Among the faces, Marietta, an elderly gossip, murmured something about old secrets, drawing reproachful looks. Jose, the grocer, organized a group to search the park and streets, but some townspeople, visibly tense, refused to join and locked themselves in, fearing something beyond a simple disappearance. Samuel, Lucas's best friend, was a quiet, observant boy. He mostly kept his head down and his eyes filled with unease when speaking to Sheriff Roberto. In a cautious conversation, Samuel confessed to seeing a strange man watching Lucas in the days before his disappearance. He described him as a tall, slender figure who always wore a metallic mask. The description was vague, but it intrigued the sheriff. Samuel shared that Lucas had been wary of the man and, a day before he vanished, had confided that the stranger had invited him on a special adventure. Roberto Medeiros, the sheriff, was an experienced man marked by years of service in the capital. He moved to Dark Vale seeking peace after losing his wife in a tragic accident. With a stern appearance, Roberto wasn't one for local superstitions, but Lucas's disappearance disturbed him. The town, with its old buildings and narrow streets, felt oppressive, as if hiding secrets beneath its sidewalks. Roberto decided to investigate thoroughly, starting at the park, where he spotted strange marks on the ground and wondered if the residents knew more than they let on. The next morning, a search team found a pair of small shoes by the creek that ran through the dense woods. They were Lucas's shoes, recognizable by the paint mark he had put on them. Seeing the shoes, Helena fell to her knees, feeling a pain that seemed to split her soul. Sheriff Roberto observed the sight closely, noting strange tracks in the mud, as if something heavy had been dragged. The discovery of the shoes intensified the town's fear, and the search became more focused, with everyone trying to understand what had happened in that isolated spot. Dark Vale's abandoned park was surrounded by old trees that seemed like silent witnesses to the town's secrets. The playground equipment was weathered by time, and a light mist covered the ground. Roberto scoured the park for more clues, sensing a nearly suffocating atmosphere. Beside an old slide, he found a piece of torn fabric caught on a low branch, seemingly from a child's clothing. The scene reinforced his suspicion that something disturbing had happened there, and he instructed the townsfolk to stay indoors at night. Marietta, a 70-year-old woman known for her scary stories, attracted the curiosity of onlookers as she whispered about ancient legends. She mentioned the Masked Guardian, a folkloric figure said to have terrorized the town decades ago. According to her, the Guardian was a masked entity who protected the town in exchange for sacrifices. Noticing Roberto's intense gaze, Marietta hesitated and quickly withdrew, murmuring to herself. The sheriff felt Marietta knew more than she was willing to share and decided to question her later, suspecting a connection between the legends and the disappearance. In the town library, Roberto found an old diary hidden among the books. It belonged to a boy named Antonio, who had mysteriously disappeared over 20 years ago. In the yellowed pages, Antonio described recurring nightmares of a masked man who followed him through the streets. He mentioned the man always appeared in the park, luring him with cryptic whispers. As Roberto read, he noted an unsettling similarity between Antonio's dreams and Samuel's descriptions of the strange man, and a chilling suspicion began to form in his mind. While Roberto investigated, an older resident named Augusto approached him with a confession. He admitted to seeing Lucas at the park on the day he disappeared, but out of fear, he had never told anyone. Augusto explained that, for years, he avoided the park due to the strange presences he felt there. He mentioned an old ritual his father used to practice, in which a mask was worn to invoke protection. Augusto's confession put the sheriff on alert, and he began to wonder how far these rituals had gone among the locals. Since Lucas's disappearance, Samuel began experiencing recurring nightmares. In these dreams, he found himself in the park, surrounded by shadows silently watching him. In one dream, the masked man whispered that Lucas was the next chosen and needed to prepare for his destiny. Samuel's mother, Alice, noticed her son's distress and, desperate, took him to Sheriff Roberto to share his visions. Roberto realized that Samuel's nightmares coincided with Antonio's descriptions in the diary, deepening his suspicion that the masked figure might be more than just a town legend. Determined to unravel the mystery, Roberto kept a night vigil at the park, despite warnings of its dangers. Armed with a flashlight and his service pistol, he walked among the abandoned playground equipment, hearing faint footsteps as if someone were following him. Suddenly, he caught sight of a hooded figure standing in the shadow of a tree. Shining his flashlight, he saw the metallic gleam of a mask, but before he could get closer, the figure vanished into the darkness. Feeling the weight of unseen eyes upon him, Roberto decided he would need reinforcements to continue the investigation safely. The next morning, Roberto received a call from Helena. She had found an old amulet among her father's belongings, something he always referred to as a protection. The amulet bore an inscription in Latin, which Roberto translated to Guardian of the Chosen. As Helena held it, she felt a strange warmth radiating from it, almost as if the amulet were alive. Roberto began to suspect that Lucas's disappearance was tied to an ancient pact some residents had made, where the Guardian demanded something in exchange for his protection. He advised Helena to keep the amulet with her as a safeguard. A gathering was held in the town square to address the community's growing concerns. The residents were tense, and many refused to leave their homes at all. During the meeting, Roberto questioned some of the older residents about the Guardian, but no one responded. Pressing further, he finally got Jose, the grocer, to admit he had heard rumors of a ritual performed by a secretive cult decades ago. According to Jose, the Guardian was believed to be a protector, but the protection came at a steep price, one no one dared speak of. The silence said more than words could, and Roberto realized the town was bound by a deep-seated, ancient fear. In the early hours of the morning, several residents reported hearing whispers emanating from the park, as though a soft voice were calling out. Helena woke up, startled, feeling Lucas's presence nearby. Unable to shake the feeling, she went outside and found Roberto, who had also been drawn by the whispers. They walked through the park together, but found only shadows and the whisper of the wind. The eerie murmurs felt unsettling, almost like the Guardian was calling for new victims. This experience stirred a fierce resolve in Helena to protect her family, fueling her determination to uncover the truth. In her search for answers, Helena discovered an old diary belonging to her father, a man she had known little about. The pages were yellowed and brittle, but the entries were still legible. In one entry, he described an encounter with the Guardian, whom he referred to as the Silent Chooser. He spoke of a pact meant to protect the town, but one with a cost too high to bear. Helena's heart sank as she realized her father seemed to have known of the sacrifices demanded. After reading the diary, Roberto suggested that her father's secrets might hold the key to saving Lucas. Driven to uncover more, Helena returned to the park alone. Shrouded in dense fog, the place felt colder and darker than ever. She moved among the abandoned playground structures, the amulet in her pocket seeming to pulse with warmth. Suddenly, she heard heavy footsteps behind her. When she turned, she saw a shadow with gleaming eyes watching her in silence. She screamed, but the figure vanished without a trace. Shaken, Helena ran to Roberto's house, describing the encounter in vivid detail, now convinced the Guardian was manifesting directly to her. Roberto decided it was time to form a search party to explore the forest. With everyone on edge, Roberto assembled a small group of residents willing to venture into the woods. Among them were Jose, Marietta, and Helena, each holding flashlights to pierce the darkness of the towering trees. The air felt thick, and the silence was oppressive, as if the forest itself were watching them. As they moved deeper, they found cryptic carvings on trees and small signs on the ground, suggesting someone had recently passed through. The group sensed they were entering unknown, possibly dangerous territory, and Jose whispered his regret about ever getting involved with the Guardian. When they reached the heart of the woods, they spotted an old cabin, nearly concealed by dense undergrowth. A sense of dread washed over them, and Helena's heart raced as she hoped to find Lucas inside. Before they could approach, however, a hooded figure emerged from the cabin, wearing the mask that gleamed eerily in the dim light. Roberto raised his flashlight, but the mask's shine was so intense that it nearly blinded him. The Guardian advanced toward them in silence, and the tension was unbearable. Marietta began to mutter prayers under her breath, as if seeking forgiveness for something long buried. Determined, Roberto attempted to confront the Guardian, but the figure remained silent, like a statue brought to life. Helena felt an inexplicable pull, as though something were calling her closer. Roberto gripped her arm, trying to hold her back, but she insisted, feeling Lucas's presence near. With a sudden motion, the Guardian raised a hand, pointing directly at Helena, as if marking her for something only he understood. In an act of defiance, Roberto shouted for the Guardian to stop, but the figure disappeared into the mist, leaving the group in shock and emptiness. Shaken by the encounter, Jose finally revealed what he knew about the Guardian. When he was young, he had witnessed a ritual in which the mask was passed to a new Guardian. The ritual was meant to protect the town from external threats, but it involved choosing a pure child to receive blessings. Jose admitted that the town elders once believed in the Guardian's power, although few understood the true cost of those sacrifices. Horrified, Helena realized these old rituals still haunted the town, and that Lucas might be the next chosen one in this dark pact. Helena clutched the amulet tightly, feeling it was her only protection. She noticed that its symbols resembled those she had seen in the forest, and when she showed it to Roberto, they decided to investigate its meaning further. Roberto took the amulet to a specialist in a nearby town, who explained it was a spiritual protection talisman used in ancient rituals to repel evil spirits. However, he warned that the amulet only worked if the wearer had the courage to face their fears without hesitation. A nearly impossible task given the terror the Guardian instilled. That night, the townsfolk all shared the same nightmare. Each dreamed of a masked figure silently watching them. The dream was so vivid that some awoke in panic, convinced the Guardian was nearby. Helena woke up with a start and, looking out her window, saw shadows moving within the park. She ran to Roberto's house, where he, too, had been jolted awake by the same dream. They both knew something had to be done quickly, before the fear spread uncontrollably, leaving the town paralyzed. Seeking answers, Roberto and Helena visited the town's old church, where they uncovered documents that described the Guardian as a mythological entity who protected the town, but only in exchange for innocent souls. The town priest, Father Antonio, revealed that the town had been cursed ever since a pact was made 100 years ago, demanding children as offerings. He warned Helena to be cautious, believing that the Guardian would return to complete the cycle. Though Roberto was skeptical, he could no longer ignore that the evidence pointed towards something beyond human understanding. During another nighttime vigil in the park, Helena and Roberto again saw the masked figure. This time, the Guardian seemed closer, and Helena felt an overwhelming compulsion to follow him. Roberto tried to restrain her, but she broke free and pursued the Guardian, drawn by a voice that whispered her name. She was convinced Lucas was nearby, almost hearing him call her. In desperation, Roberto followed both, trying to prevent Helena from reaching the figure, but the force of attraction was so intense it seemed impossible to resist. The Guardian led Helena to a clearing in the woods where an altar covered in ancient inscriptions stood. Roberto attempted to hold her back, but it was as though Helena were in a trance. She could hear Lucas calling her name, and she believed the Guardian held the answers to her son's whereabouts. As the Guardian began a silent ritual, The mask on his face seemed to come alive, shifting as though imbued with a soul of its own. Roberto realized that the ritual wasn't meant to protect Helena but rather to bind her to the Guardian's power, prompting him to take drastic action. As the ritual reached its peak, Helena gripped the amulet, raising it toward the Guardian. For a brief moment, he hesitated. Roberto shouted for her to break the amulet, believing it might end the Guardian's cycle. In a surge of courage and desperation, Helena snapped the amulet in two. The Guardian recoiled as though wounded, and a deafening scream echoed through the forest. The mask began to crack, revealing only a dark shadow behind it before the Guardian vanished in a cloud of mist, leaving the clearing shrouded in silence. With the Guardian defeated, Helena felt a peace she hadn't experienced in days. As she and Roberto left the clearing, they heard light footsteps behind them. Turning around, they found Lucas, looking confused but unharmed, as though waking from a deep sleep. Helena ran to embrace him, feeling that she had finally overcome the darkness haunting Dark Vale. Lucas recalled little, only that he had been in a cold place and that someone had protected him until the very end. The townspeople were shaken by Lucas's disappearance and the events in the woods. Slowly, they began repairing old houses, discarding the superstitious practices that had kept fear alive. Roberto noted that the town was slowly liberating itself from the shadows, and he and Helena received gratitude from their neighbors, who saw them as the ones who had broken the Guardian's cycle. With newfound resolve, the town began to leave its dark past behind. In her home, Helena discovered a letter from her father written years earlier, explaining the town's pact. He described his own attempts to break the cycle but admitted he had failed. He expressed sorrow for not protecting Helena, urging her to be strong should the Guardian ever reappear. With tears in her eyes, Helena realized her father had fought the same battle against the Guardian, yet she had finally achieved the victory he had sought. Though the Guardian had vanished, his legend endured. On misty nights, some residents swore they could hear faint footsteps in the woods and the soft scrape of a moving mask. Helena and Lucas's story became a tale of resilience, but many believed the Guardian still watched the town from afar, awaiting a moment of weakness. Helena and Lucas carried on, knowing they had faced something beyond understanding, and Dark Vale now breathed a cautious sigh of relief, forever respecting the darkness they had conquered.